Welcome to Tech with Adidayo. Today, we'll be looking at this playlist. The title is going to be Managing Pods. And we are going to have different videos, right, of different aspects of managing pods, right? So the first thing we are going to look at is the tool we are going to be using. We are going to be using Kind, which means Kubernetes in Docker, right? And if you want to do all this practice all by yourself, you can always go to my repository, Tech with Adidayo, Managing Pods, and you can see the README. And in here, you can see how you can install Kubernetes in Docker, and even all the manifest files are structured one after the other. And this way, you'll be able to practice all by yourself. And if you want to watch the video and then practice with me, and then come back later to check whatever you've done or to practice all over again, the repository is here, right? So let's continue. So before, let's say about 5 years or more ago, Kubernetes designed something called Minikube, right? And what this happens is it allows to use Kubernetes for local development, right? And this Minikube allows only single node cluster, which is limited, right? And because in a normal Kubernetes cluster, which is a normal Kubernetes cluster, which can be on your bare metal servers or even cloud, right? You will have at least one master node, which is control plane, and then you can have at least one worker node, right? So that means you can have 2, you can have 3, and even you have more than one master node, right? And this will ensure that your cluster is highly available and is fault tolerant. These things are so important because you are able to test so many things, so many deployments, and test so many ways to manage your pods. Like for instance, things we'll be looking at, like NodeSelector, like Node Affinity, like Taints Toleration, right? All these things, you won't be able to do them in a single node cluster, right? Because you just have one single place to try, right? But this works. Back then, even if you want to learn about Kubernetes, this works. Most of my tutorials that I've done last, you see that I've used Minikube. So if you want to learn the prerequisites, but as time goes on, you want to learn other parts of Kubernetes that will make you advanced and a professional. Now, Docker now comes up with Kind, which is Kubernetes in Docker, which allows you to simulate this Kubernetes cluster, the real Kubernetes cluster. And this way, you can have multiple master nodes or single if you want, and you have different worker nodes. And in this place, you can now try all these things, all these NodeSelector, different ways of managing pods. You can now try it and see how it works. So how does Kind works? So Kind is built on Docker, right? So before you're able to run Kind, make sure you have to make sure you have this one installed. You have to make sure you have Docker installed, right? On Windows, I will recommend you use Docker Desktop. And on Linux, you can use your normal Docker installation. And make sure you add your Docker to sudo group. That way you'll be able to execute Docker without saying sudo blah, 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 and the rest, right? So how does this Kind works? So Kind works is, the way is all these things, all these nodes, the master node, they are all containers. They are all Docker containers, right? This is a Docker container. This one also is a Docker container. This one is a Docker container, right? They are Docker containers that Kubernetes is installed inside them. They all have Kubernetes installed inside them. And before I forget to, make sure on your computer as well, you have kubectl. This is the Swiss Army knife of Kubernetes. You need it too, right? So I'm just saying you have Kubernetes installed inside these container images. So what this allows us to do is, even on your local system, you are able to use multiple Kubernetes clusters with this kind. So kind is really very good, and that's what we are going to be using in this class. So let's go to this place and see how we can install kind. So I'll say google.com, and I'm going to say install kind Kubernetes, right? And I'm going to say yes, quick start this place. Great, and we have different ways: installing from release binaries, package manager, source, creating a cluster, deleting a cluster. So this is the source of truth. If you want to see everything, right? So I'll explain this. On Linux, we have different architectures on different operating systems. We all know that. And if your architecture is AMD64, you use this, you name this first. And if it's ARM64, you ignore this option and you use this command. After then, you had to execute permission to the kind folder in which this is going to go, right? And then you move the kind folder to USR local kind bin kind, so you are able to run kind by itself without having to specify the path, right? And the same goes for Mac OS. If you are using x86-64 Intel Macs, or you are using M1 or higher ARM Macs, use this and follow this. And the same goes with Windows. If you want to use this command on PowerShell, right, you can use that. I'm using Linux, so I've installed mine using this AMD64, and I've followed this, right? It's also on this place. So if you scroll down here, you'll see all the prerequisites. I told you Docker needs to be installed. You need kubectl to be installed. You can use Ubuntu if you want, and you can use Windows. I'm using Ubuntu. So see right here, and you can do kind version, right? So and kind is nice to let us use package manager, which is brew. If you're on Mac OS, you can use Homebrew. And if you are on Windows, you can use Scoop, or you can use Chocolatey, right? And so the first thing we need to do is know how to create a cluster. And if you go here and read it, you are going to understand how to create a cluster. So for instance, see, say kind create cluster -- name kind. So this will create a single node cluster, and that's what we want to do. So to create a cluster is very simple in kind. All we have to say is kind create cluster, and we're going to give it a name, and I'm going to say name, and I'm going to pass the name of dev cluster to it, right? And I'm going to press enter, and this is going to create a single node cluster for us. Right, so the cluster has been successfully created, right? So we can say kubectl using our Swiss Army knife, get nodes, and you can see our single node cluster, right? And to get the context and see where it's running, we can actually do this and do this, and we are going to get the context, and it says it's running right here, right? So it shows that it's running. And to show you that this is actually a Docker container, I'm going to say Docker images, and right here you see that it is a Docker image. Let's see if it's running or not. Let's say Docker PS, and you see kindness node, and what the image version is 1.31, right? So that's great. So now let's create a deployment inside our Kubernetes cluster, newly created one. So we're going to use terminal to create that. We're not going to use a manifest file. We're going to use add commands. Now we say kubectl. I'm going to create a deployment called nginx, and it's going to pull an image from the Docker hub called nginx, right? And I'm going to press enter, and it has created a deployment called nginx for us. And I'm going to create a service. And how do we do that? I'm going to say kubectl. I'm going to say expose, and I'm going to expose our deployment nginx, and I'm going to say on port 80, which is the container port, and I'm going to say the type should be node port, and this is where it's going to expose our service to our local. And once I do this, I'm going to press enter, and it's going to create our service, and our service has been exposed. And if I say kubectl get all, we should be able to see our container is creating, and this is our service nginx, And now this, we have created a single node cluster, right? And now to see how we can, let's see one more time if the container is created, and it's still creating, so we are not going to wait for it to create. That's probably the internet. And now let's see how we can delete this single node cluster. I'm going to say kubectl delete, right? To delete cluster, I'm going to say cluster, and I'm going to pass the name of that cluster. And the cluster name is dev cluster, right? And this is it. So if I delete this, and it's, oh yeah, we are supposed to use kind, and that's my bad. I'm going to go here. I'm going to say kind delete cluster, right? And it's deleting the cluster. This is how you can delete cluster with kind. So this is gone. If we say kubectl get nodes, you see there will be nothing, right? And it's passing nothing. And we're going to say kind get clusters to see if our cluster is there, and it's saying no cluster found. So let's see how we can create a multi-node cluster. So for this, I'm just going to say make directory multi-node, right? I'm going to say multi-node, and I'm going to just go into that direction, say multi-node, and I'm going to say vim, and I'm going to say vim, what should we, let's call it 3-node clusters. I want to create a 3-node cluster, and this is how we do it, right? You have to create a manifest file for that, right? And you pass that first, you say I, and you say what kind of cluster do we will say kind cluster, and then we say the API version. It should be API version. And what's the API version? We're going to say kind hex. We're going to say k8s.io. We're going to pass v1 alpha. So this is not something you can cram. You can always go to kind documentation. I'm going to say kind, right? Kind Kubernetes quick start. And right here, we'll be able to find, let's go here, and we should be able to see how we can create multi-cluster. So I'm going to say create cluster, and let's come here, and this is the first one we did, and this is how we delete cluster. I will pass the name to it, so that way we should be able to create a multi-cluster as well. Let's see how we can create that. One sec, create cluster by design. It should be down, let's see. Okay, great. So this is how we can do it. So you can just come here straight and copy it. No worries, come here. I'm going to clear all of this, and I'm going to paste this. And the only thing I'm going to say is I want to name my cluster, mini cluster, and I'm going to come here. I'm going to say name. I'm going to give it mini cluster, right? So when I create my cluster, this is the name it's going to give it, right? And I want my workers to be 3, right? I'm going to say role. I'm going to add one more worker, and this is going to be worker. So we are going to have one control plane, which is going to be the master node, and then we are going to have 3 worker nodes, right? I'm going to save it. I'm going to press escape and save it. So right. So now how do we start it? It's the same thing. We're going to say kind create cluster, and we're going to pass config instead. Config, and then we are going to say what's the name of the file? 3-node. And to be sure that we've passed the right command, let's just go back here and let's see create client cluster config, and it's telling us this is the name of the file, and that's the same thing we've done here. And kind create cluster config, and this is it. So if we press enter, it will start creating our mini cluster for us, and this time it's going to be a 3-node cluster with a single master node. Let's wait. Right. Great. Now our 3-node cluster is up. If I say kubectl get nodes, you should see control plane and 3 worker nodes. Right? See it right here. This is control plane, and right here we have 3. It's telling us that they are not ready yet. So, but in a short while they'll be ready. While we're waiting, let's say kind get cluster, and we see that we only have one single cluster, which is mini cluster. Now we have our 3-node cluster, and this is what we are going to use for the remainder of this class, right? Yeah. So